it's a very special talk, not only for being the fourth masterclass, but also for being the first in which the speaker is a sommelier. As you should know, all the sommeliers of Argentina, the last 3 talks were with different producers from Argentina and from all over the world, and we were thinking in having a top sommelier. And the best name that we thought was, of course, Marc Almert, who is now, since last year, the best sommelier of the world. He won the best sommelier competition in Antwerp, in Belgium, last year, and was the same year as Valeria Gamper was elected best sommelier of Argentina in our national competition. So it's a pleasure for us to have Marc, not only for the time, but also to have the vision about his life, her vision about the profession of sommelier, and also the German wines that have a lot of people crowded here in Argentina. We don't have a lot of Riesling here, but we want Marc to share their vision about this. So let's enjoy. An honor to have again Marc and Valeria Gamper with us sharing their vision. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Thank you for the warm words, Matthias. The first time I met Matthias was in Japan. So it's very interesting how we meet in different places in the world, and now via Zoom due to the special situation all of us are in. I was thrilled to see how many of you took the time, because I know for you it's probably I'm taking you away from your lunch now. I think it's 1 p.m. in Argentina, so it's nice of you to bear with me. And I hope that despite it still being 1 p.m., you have brought a Riesling, if possible, or something else to enjoy while we're doing our presentation. And I'm really happy to do this together with Valeria, who I heard is also competing. And I saw there are some other competition sommeliers like Karim Patricio from Portugal and Paz Levinson there too. So it's great to see some familiar faces, but also to meet all of you new faces. So I hope we have a nice time together. Hello to everybody.
Hello, Marc. How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
So everybody knows he's the best sommelier of the world 2019. He's one of the youngest sommelier to achieve that title, which is quite amazing. He's from Germany and works in Zurich, where he's in charge of the wine program of the 5-star hotels Badulac, including the restaurant Pavillon, which is 2 Michelin star. Well, it's a 2 Michelin star restaurant, and he also works closely with the hotel's wine distribution company called Badulac Vans. And besides wine buying, traveling, staff training, tasting, and do a lot of paperwork, he still works on the floor every week. So that's quite amazing for me. So before we commence with the German overview, I could like you to tell us how did you enter the wine world? What was your inspiration? And if you remember, I don't know, the first wine that left a lasting impression, like a big lasting impression.
Yes, and I just want to say, if any of you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and then we will address the questions as we go along. Originally, I am from Cologne, which is close to where the president of the German Sommelier Association is based, who is with us here today too. So hello, Per. I saw you brought a nice wine for aperitif. And Cologne, people outside of Germany might not know. It's one of the largest cities of Germany, shown now. And it's close to Düsseldorf, so where the Pro wine happens. That's what some people from the wine world know. And that's outside of any wine region. The closest wine region would be the Ahr, known for its red wines. But there I was wondering what I want to do with my life. I always like to travel. I always like to speak different languages and meet cultures and get to know people from different cultures. And I always like to eat. So I thought it would be good to start in the hotel industry. And in my hometown of Cologne, I did a job training as a hotel specialist, as it's called in Germany, where you spend 3 years doing everything to do in a hotel. So from washing the dishes, cleaning the rooms, doing the kitchen, doing service, doing front office. And that was the first time I really discovered some wines. And most of that was done outside of work with colleagues that were also interested in wine. But there were some really memorable moments. And one of those was really legendary tasting in our wine cellar, made for different restaurant managers in Cologne. And then we had Mr. Symington from the port houses and Mr. Egon Müller from the region Mosel. And they were each showing a vintage vertical. So I was 19 at the time, and they were showing wines that were double or 3 times as old as myself. And I found that completely fascinating, how these wines could be so alive. And I wanted to understand how these wines could be so good and so interesting, even though they were really, really old for someone young like me at the time. And that was one of the key moments. And then many more followed. There was a wine harvest in the Ahr, which I was able to participate. And I always thought wine is very interesting, and I wanted to know more and understand more. But to me, I wanted to become a hotel manager. So I thought wine is a great hobby and went for hotel management first. And then during that management training, I noticed that actually it's the other way around. And I really miss working on the floor and working with guests and wine. And so then I took my first wine job in the Rheingau, a very famous Riesling region, in a place called Wiesbaden. And that's since then I work with wine around the clock, full stop. And that was like 2012.
Good. And concerning competition, what were your steps? How many times did you participate in a contest before the World Championship?
When I was working in Wiesbaden, I was in a very historic restaurant called Die Ente, which is one of the oldest Michelin restaurants of Germany. And I was very lucky. I had a great head sommelier, and he taught me a lot, and I really owe a lot to him. But he also, after having taught me a lot, he became strict because I was interested in wine. I was learning about wine, but I was not really giving it a proper measure. So he said, it's really important that you do a kind of exam and maybe do some competitions to prepare. And at the time he was studying for the certified sommelier of the Court of Master Sommeliers. So he said that might be good to register. And to prepare, you should do competitions. And we have something called Chaîne de Rôtisseurs. I don't know if they exist in Argentina. It's an association which takes care of young chef contests and young sommelier contests. And he enrolled me to that contest against my will. But I had to participate because my boss said so, and I did. And that was the first time, and I became second best young sommelier of Germany. So it was a good start, and I was happy to continue. So I tried to do all the competitions I can. And 1 year later, I won that competition and for Germany, and then was able to do the international finals. And they were in Adelaide in that year, because they're in a different place every year. So I was very, very lucky. I could see Barossa and all the other wine regions like McLaren Vale. And that was the first time I met people that were studying for the MS. I was in a room full of MS people. And these were like really very, very serious sommeliers. And I was completely thrown into another world and felt like being very, very young and unexperienced still. But I wanted to be better, because in that competition I did very bad because I had no experience. And I said, okay, I need to do this better. So I kept enrolling for every competition I could find, like the best sommelier for Spanish wines, the best sommelier for South African wines in Germany. And I was very lucky that then some of them worked. And for example, South Africa was probably the first international sommelier competition I could win. It's called the Wines of South Africa Sommelier Cup. And they do it every 3 years in South Africa. So I was very lucky. There was also one called Gaggenau Sommelier Awards, which is a producer of Kitchen that also does a sommelier competition. And then I started registering for more serious competitions like the Best Sommelier of Germany, where as before, I came second in 2015. And then I wanted to do better and compete more. And then in 2017, I won. Which then made me the candidate for the Best Sommelier of the World competition. And that was the first ASI competition I ever took part in. Yeah. And the last one.
It was the first time for you in the World Championship, right?
Yes, first time World Championship, or I also never went to Best Sommelier of Europe before.
Good. And what does it mean for you to be the Best Sommelier of the World? Because it's one of the biggest titles one sommelier can achieve. So what does it mean for you?
It's now been almost a year. It was last March. And I was very happy that it was last March, because I think if it would have been this March, we could not have had a World Cup and could not have shared so many happy moments with nice colleagues in Antwerpen. And to me, it was the first couple of weeks really crazy, because you see so many legendary sommeliers like Gérard Basset, like Serge Dupes, like Marcus Del Monego, and then suddenly it's like it's over and you're like sitting at the table with them and drinking wine, and it's really, really crazy and you feel very out of place. And then things start to happen, and to me it was important to keep working on the floor. And I was very lucky that I had a great team that supported me both before and after the contest. And that's the German Sommelier Association that helped me a lot, also in the first month after the contest, but especially for the training. But also the team at the hotel. For example, our restaurant manager is a French guy coming from Burgundy, so he knows wine very, very well since he was born, and he's the current best sommelier of Switzerland. And we said, okay, he's a good help, but I need more help. So we got a young lady to help us, Angelika Grundler, who's here today too. So thank you for joining. And that way it was able that I could stay on the floor some days, but I could also travel. And to me, that is really the most beautiful thing about this title, outside of crazy Corona times, that you get to travel and you get to see the whole world and meet the whole world, that you are able to see how a sommelier is working in South America, in Asia, in Australia, and that you can help shape that process a little bit. And that to me has been the most beautiful thing in this last year, being able to travel and to connect. And even now in these times, to be able to connect to 100 Argentinian sommeliers on a Tuesday afternoon from the home is great, to exchange about wine and see what your philosophy is and what we can learn from one another.
So basically, in which way do you think your life has changed after winning the title? Was there before, how it is now?
Yeah, before I was really focused more on the work on the floor. I still work on the floor, but now I work a little bit more with our wine shops. And also now there are more people that are asking you to host a tasting, for example, and that can be for customers in the restaurant, but that can also be during fair like Vinexpo or ProWein, and that's become more global. But already was there when I won the Best Sommelier of Germany, but then it was very focused on the German-speaking countries. Now it's really, you get people asking you from Argentina, from Canada, from Kyoto, and that's the biggest change. And before Corona, that included also meeting these people in their countries. Now it's still very global, but it's become more of an online thing.
Okay. Well, you're from Germany and you work in Swedish, and they are two both wine producing countries as well as big wine consumers. I think you have at your disposal wine from all over the world. So what's your philosophy behind your wine program? How do you build your wine list? How do you choose the wines by the glass? And I don't know, how is your approach on wine pairing? I want to know everything.
I work in Zurich, which is the biggest city of Switzerland. Big is very relative. We only have about 800,000 people. I think Buenos Aires is a little bit bigger. And in Zurich, I work in a very classic hotel, which is called the Beau Lac, and that was founded in 1844. And it's been founded by the same family that still runs it. And so it's a very classic, established 5-star hotel. And we also have a series of wine shops called Beau Lac Vin. And these have been operating since 1844 too. So we have very many, very long-standing relationships to producers across the whole world. And for example, that means at the moment we're importing from about 300 different wineries and are importing about 3,000 different wines. And for that, we have a big store of 2 million bottles outside of Zurich. But the hotel, being a very historic building, can only sadly take about 10,000 bottles. So from this big portfolio, I try to do a smaller selection of 700 wines is what we have. And I think when you make a wine selection, it's very important to look what your market is asking for. And Zurich is quite a traditional market. So here we focus on Bordeaux mainly, a little bit of Burgundy, and then mainly our own country, Swiss wine, but also our neighboring countries like Fedlina from Austria, red wines from Italy, red wines from not neighboring, but also very popular here, Spain. And then add in a little bit of the classics from around the world. But at the same time, we also try to reflect some of the trends happening in the wine world, like more people asking for organic or biodynamic wine, more people asking for natural wine. But with us, that's not the focus, but I think it's important to have that in the wine list too. So that's how we do it in general. To become a bit more specific, we have several restaurants in the hotel. we have a classic French 2-star restaurant. So there it's a very classic wine list, but we also have a very modern bistro. And there we have quite a large selection of wines by the glass. And we also have a lot of half bottles, because that's something that more and more people are asking for in Switzerland. And there we really try to have a big mix of classics like Bordeaux, Burgundy, Tuscany, but also some new trends, like wines from overseas are still considered a new trend in Switzerland. It's not the most modern country for wine. And we also have a winery of the month, which changes every 4 weeks. And there we portray a winery and really try to show 5 or 6 wines from one winery. In the Michelin restaurant, we again try to have a mix, but there we focus, as many gourmet restaurants, on our wine pairing flights. And there we usually have 2 different wine pairing flights. One is completely for Swiss wine only, and one is a selection of international wines. And there we also try to cover a breadth of prices. Let's say our cheapest glass of wine starts at around €8, and then the most expensive glass of wine can be up to, let's say, more or less €40. And that way we always have about 15 to 20 different wines by the glass on offer in every restaurant.
So I have one question. I lost it, Monica. The question about, do you have it there? Or?
I think otherwise it might be interesting Swiss wine, just as a short side note, although we're going to speak about my home country today. Swiss wine is something even coming from Germany, which you would think, being close to Switzerland, you would know. There we don't see a lot of Swiss wine because the Swiss drink the majority of their production themselves. 99.3% of Swiss wine is drunk in Switzerland. And that's why when I came here about 3.5 years ago, it was really a huge discovery for me to find out more about Swiss wine, and I'm still discovering that and visiting all the wineries. And we are a country where we have very, very, very small wineries. Many are family run. And when you call them and say, hey, I want to buy your wine, if you do that in Germany, then usually they say, okay, how many boxes do you want? In Switzerland, they are like, okay, maybe next year I can give you 6 or 12 bottles. Because they really have all their production sold usually, and you really have to work very close with the producers over years to get a bigger allocation for your restaurant to be able to show the top wines of Switzerland. And I think the beauty of Swiss wine is you have so many specific grapes, especially in the western part in Valais, but also some classic international grapes like Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Syrah, which really excel both in Valais, but also in Grison in the east, which is probably the region that can compare to Burgundy the most.
Good. But concerning studying was and is a big part of your life. And how did you prepare for the competition? How many times did it take you? Germany Sommelier Association have helped you, because although it is a really personal path, it's really, really, really hard to succeed doing it alone. So can you share some techniques, some study techniques, or something that you can share with us?
I think the most important thing is to understand that competition doesn't test anything you usually don't do. I think the best way to prepare for a competition is if you're working as a sommelier in a restaurant, many things you do every day will happen in a competition. You will have to decant a bottle of red wine. You will have to open sparkling wine. You will have to recommend some food. And I think you can adapt the way you do that in a restaurant to do it in a way that is a bit more close to the competition style. For example, many people in a competition lose a point because when they cut the foil, they don't wipe the top of the bottle. That's something you can do every day in the restaurant, and it becomes your second nature. And then you will always do that in every exam or competition in your life and never even have to think about it. And I think that's very important to remember, that really working in a restaurant is the best preparation. Apart from that, very important if you're learning for a competition or an exam, to know what is my motivation, because if you're only learning for that competition or that exam, most things you learn for theory, you will forget afterwards. And also it will feel like a chore, but I think it's something you really need to want to do. And for me, the goal was never winning the competition. I did the competitions actually to prepare for my sommelier exams and to become a better sommelier. That was my motivation. I wanted to learn more and understand more, that when I'm speaking to my guests or my colleagues, I can answer more questions. And I think that's very important to have that kind of intrinsic motivation and not say, okay, I need to learn because otherwise Matthias is not happy if I do bad in the best sommelier of Argentina competition. think it's important you have your own motivation. But because it's so time consuming and because there's so many different things you need to practice, like tasting, like service, like theory, very important that you have a team of supporters. And there I was very lucky that I had the German Sommelier Association, especially with Per, but also with a personal coach, a master sommelier called Frank Kemmer. And they trained me a lot, but it was nice that we were also not training on our own. We are training together with Joe Wessels, who is the best sommelier of South Africa and was also competing in Antwerp. So we were having a lot of connections. I was trying to do as many mock exams as possible. So still trying to do some competitions or going to trainings like Somm 360 in Canada. I was using YouTube a lot to watch other competitions to see what are the tasks of certain, like best sommelier of America or best sommelier of Asia or best sommelier of certain countries, like the Nordics are very strong, and was analyzing that. At the same time, I was learning theory and tasting. And there it's very important to see if you're learning for a specific competition or for CMS or for WSET, what kind of theory and what kind of tasting is expected of you, and to really get into that format of questions and of tasting. And then to see how can I access many bottles? Can I go to a wine fair, or can my boss help me, supply me with some wines? Can some sponsors help me? So you get a lot of wines to help you. And theory is probably the most tedious because it's so vast. It can be not only wine, but sake or beer or coffee or spirits. And it's sheer endless what you can get asked. But I think it's very important to make a plan for yourself where you allocate time to certain topics, allocate a bit more time to the topics you don't know, and a bit less time to the topics you know very well because you work with them every day. For example, I don't usually spend a lot of time learning about Germany, but I spend a lot of time learning all the appellations of Eastern Europe, and then trying to see how can I study. And I think before you go on a project like that, it's very important to look at study techniques. Are you someone who is more the visual guy? Are you someone who's more into flashcards? Are you someone who's more into reading books and taking notes? To look at what possibilities do I have to learn, and then to find the one that is best for you. For me, that was mainly flashcards, both in paper, but also in Android apps like Anki or StudyBlue. And then I just went through all the topics again and again and went through the different questions I had seen in other competitions, but also looking through textbooks, looking through GuildSomm, and trying to make my notes. And that's something I think you should never stop, because the wine world changes incredibly fast. Like there are new appellations every year, and new vintages and new top producers. So it's something that even if you have passed an exam, I think it's important to keep that going, to really stay on top of the game and stay current and read the current media, what's written in Decanter, what's written in Wine Business from Meininger and stuff, and to really stay up to the day, like stay current to the daily news.
And I have the last question before we go into the German part. You are the best sommelier of the world. You are an advanced sommelier for the course of Master Sommelier, and you are preparing yourself for the Master Sommelier exam, which is one of the hardest exams one sommelier can have. How do you challenge yourself to be better?
I think it's, as a sommelier, it's really easy, because I'm sure each of us always get to see a wine or get to see a spirit or tea that we've never seen before. And I think one of the key abilities or traits of a sommelier is to be curious. And if you are curious, whenever you see a wine that you don't know before, I think the sommelier will always want to find out, okay, where's this from? Who's making this? What is the grape? What is the region? And I think that's something really important to look into, to always stay curious. And that way you will always stay open also for new styles. For example, when we had the first wave of orange wine, very many classic sommeliers did not like it at all, but some, even though they did not like it, were trying to understand, okay, why is it suddenly so popular? How does this work? And I think that's important, that you step away from your own opinion, but are open to listen to others and to have guidance, and to always stay open to what's happening, and to asking questions, okay, what do I need to do to stay on top of the game?
Okay. Would you like to go to the German presentation?
Yes. For that, I can always see 25 of you. So if you can just ask you some questions, and we'll ask you to raise your hand, just keep it up for some seconds. Who of you has been to Germany? Okay, not so many. That's good. So I have probably something to talk. Who works with German wine in a restaurant or wine shop? Okay. And anybody who has drunk a German wine other than Riesling so far? Yes. Okay. Good. So quite a couple. Cool. It seems like some people know German wine a little bit already. Some don't yet. So I'm really happy. It's not like I'll be talking loads of stuff you already know. This will be like 40 minutes. The idea is that I introduce a little bit what are the key grapes of Germany, what are the key styles, what are the labels. That's usually the most complicated for people that don't speak German. And then we can have some questions. So please feel free to write questions in the chat if you have any. And then we will go through the 13 Anbaugebiete or wine regions we'll be looking at. And in the middle, I'll be showing you a wine I'm drinking, because I think it's always good when you're speaking about wine law and wine labels to really explain with one label. For this, I'll be sharing my screen with a PowerPoint presentation, and you are free to take notes, but at the end or after our presentation, Monica will send 2 PDFs to you, one from the PowerPoint and one from something called the German Wine Manual, both of which were prepared by the German Wine Institute. And they also have their contacts in there. If you have any questions on German wine, they are really the ones to go to and they can help you. So I will try to share my screen now. I'm not very good with technique, so I hope it works. So maybe Monica, if you could just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Monica Aurelia, yeah, perfect, good. So we will be going through Germany, which is my home country. And now I hope that works. Ah, there. And we will be looking at why should we even look at Germany? Is it worth it or not? Where does Germany stand in the world of wine? What are our key grapes? What's the situation today? And then in the end, be going through the 13 wine growing regions. So why should we look at Germany? This is a wine price list from Barry Brothers. That's probably the most prestigious wine merchant in London. And it's from 1896. And the old English word for German wine was Hock. And here you can see they're labeled mainly by the villages, Rüdesheim, Markobrunn, Steinwein, and cost about 50 to 70 pounds. And if you go on the left, you can see famous producers like Chateau Palmer or Chateau Margaux being cheaper than German wine. So that tells us that in the 19th century, German wine was actually on the same level as Burgundy or Bordeaux or Champagne. Obviously, we then had a very unpleasant history in Germany. So then the prices dropped and have never really gone back to this level. But it just shows that historically, Germany is one of the really interesting countries. And I think one thing that has really helped shape that in general now come back is the German Riesling, especially as a dry style, the große Gewächs, the GG, which we'll be looking at. But I think more recently, something that's really gotten a lot of interest is Pinot Noir. And this is a clipping from Bloomberg. And I think as Burgundy is becoming more expensive, more and more people are looking to see where can I get good Pinot Noir in other places in the world. And that can be Oregon, that can be Switzerland, that can be New Zealand, but it can also be Germany. So these will be some statistics, no German presentation without statistics, but we'll be going through them quite quickly. So you have a little bit of time to see them later. And here I just thought it was interesting to see what are the main wine producing countries in the world. You can see like Spain and France being very close to 1 million, but us being quite small with rounded about 103,000 hectares. I don't know, do you do hectares in Argentina? I hope, yeah, no acres? Yeah, okay. So it's not too big, but not too small. And in terms of production, we do about 10 million hectoliters every year. So again, it's one of the medium to smaller sized wine producing countries of the world. And here it's important to know which grapes we do. And of course, the number one for white grapes, but also for all grapes is Riesling. Thinking roughly that we do just over 100,000 hectares, you can see that almost 24,000 hectares, so almost a quarter of Germany is Riesling. So that really is the key thing we do. And that's something which is steadily going up, while other grapes you might not have heard of so much are going down, like Müller-Thurgau. which used to be a very entry-level grape, and even in Germany you won't see on that many wine lists. Other things you can see going up are things like Grauburgunder or Weißburgunder, which are internationally more known as Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio and Pinot Blanc or Pinot Bianco. But we will be looking at these grapes related to their regions later on in the presentation. Riesling is our main thing, and you can see that by very, very far, we are still the #1 in Germany, in the world for the production of Riesling. So it's really the thing Germany has always been famous for and will continue to be famous forever. For red, it's a very different picture. We have much less. If you look that we had about 100,000 hectares in total, 34,000 are red. So we have about 2/3 of white wine and 1/3 of red wine. And here we see Spätburgunder or Pinot Noir being the key grape for red. And then other grapes, which outside of Germany, I trust and partially hope you won't see, because they were made more for very special styles of domestic production. But Spätburgunder and Pinot Noir is really something to look for if you can find it from Germany. And again, here we're actually #3 in the world after France and the USA, which I think always surprises me, because people usually think more of, let's say, Australian or New Zealand Pinot Noir, but actually we make quite a fair amount ourselves too. And it's really something, if you can get your hands on, I would recommend you do it. And the Pinot family of grapes is very important for Germany in total. You can see it's been going up over the decades. So that's Spätburgunder or Pinot Noir, but also Grauburgunder and Weißburgunder. And recently we've also seen Chardonnay going up and even being allowed for Großgewächse or GGs in some countries. And then we have the rest of the Pinot family also steadily going up. So where is this today? Where are we? Here I want to speak a little bit, how do I know when I have a German wine label? What's it telling me? What are all the things I see there? Because I think that's very confusing sometimes. And this is basically a quality pyramid, like you probably know it from very many countries. This would be the very entry-level quality called Deutscher Wein, which translates to German wine. That would be the very, very base quality. Immediately above that, you have Deutscher Landwein, so like a Vin du Pays in France, which used to be just base quality, but now we also see that some of the more modern producers that are, for example, doing orange wine, have to go back to this category because they don't get the next level. So there are some really good Landweine out there. But the main thing you will probably have seen is Qualitätswein bestimmter Anbaugebiete, so-called QBA. That's a really long German phrase, and it means quality wine for the Q, bestimmter, so specific, Anbaugebiete, which means wine growing regions. Those are the 13 denominated wine growing regions we'll be looking at later. And this would be probably the quality you find most in the market, usually with the word trocken added to it for dry. Those would be the majority of all German wines. Here we then have something very specific, that Germany has a quality level of Prädikate, which are based on the Oechsle levels or the must weights. So the longer you wait to pick a grape, the more must weight and the more sugar it has. And that is what crafts the Prädikate in Germany. And so it's not really an indication of quality, but more of sweetness and must weight at picking. And it starts with Kabinett and then moves up as it becomes sweeter from Spätlese, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Eiswein, and Trockenbeerenauslese. And basically, the more you have this, the more sweeter they will be. And the only one that is becoming very, very rare is the Eiswein, because you've all heard about global warming. In Germany, the last couple of vintages, we were sadly not able to produce Eiswein very much. There were only very few producers, because you need a very consistent temperature of -7 degrees overnight, and also be crushing the grapes at -7. So it's very rare that we have these kind of temperatures at the moment, even in December. So the key thing to remember here is to really look for, is it a Qualitätswein or is it a Prädikatswein? And if it is a Prädikatswein, which of these labels do I have? Because you will know it will be very, very sweet. On a Qualitätswein, it will usually be trocken unless stated otherwise. And very often you will see this, the eagle on a bottle of German wine you will find abroad. And this is the eagle with the grapes of the VDP. And the VDP is der Verband Deutscher Prädikatsweingüter, so the Association of German Quality or Prädikate wineries. And this was founded back in 1910, but is actually the oldest national association of premium wine estates in the world. And here we have just under 200 wineries that are looking at the German wine law and saying, okay, this is very good, but we want to have even more specific rules for quality. And they will have regional presidents, and these will be usually in most regions, the premium producers will be all in the VDP, except for some exceptions. So there it's very important. If you see this eagle on the label and VDP, usually know you're really looking at one of the top 200 producers of Germany. Generalizing a bit, but that is the basic idea. And they keep changing their laws a little bit too. And they did something in 2012, which all of their members have to do, but many other wineries that are not in the VDP have adopted. Why? Because it's basically based on the Burgundy model. And if you think of the wines of Burgundy, it will be very easy for you to understand this pyramid of German VDP wine. A Gutswein would be like, Gut would be the winery wine. So let's say you have a winery from Rheingau, they could source the grapes for this from anywhere within the Rheingau. So it would be like a vin régional in Burgundy. If then this winery, for example, is in Kiedrich, you might know that from Robert Weil, then it would be a village on Ortswein. Ort is the German word for village. So this would be the next quality, which again, you might know from the Burgundy model. And then we have the Lage. Lage is the German word for vineyard or cru in French. And here they have two levels. Not all of the country, not all of the Anbaugebiete have two levels, but most do. And basically what's the saying is Erste Lage is like a Premier Cru, so it's already very, very good. But there are some vineyards which are even better. And those then are the VDP Große Lage. And those are like a Grand Cru. However, we have very, very many Grand Crus. Like every year we have about 400 wines at the Grand Cru tasting. So it's quite a couple of wines. And the VDP has added to that if you want to make a Prädikat, so the things we spoke about like Kabinett, Spätlese, Auslese, you can only make that sweet, which was not the case before. And if you make a dry wine in a VDP Große Lage, then it becomes a Große Gewächs, like a Grand Cru. And those are the best dry wines you can see. And they would then also have this sign, the GG, on the bottle, on the glass, and would probably also have the term GG somewhere on the label. So these are really the very historic, specific vineyard sites which have made excellent wines from traditional grapes of that specific region since centuries. And they need to be handpicked. They need to have a very low maximum yield, and they need to be aged for a long time. By law, the white wines need to age at least till the 1st of September following the harvest, and the red wines 1 extra year. However, luckily, we see more and more producers keeping their wines back even longer and showing them a bit later to the public when they've reached this age. And why? Of course, many of you will know Riesling is probably one of the grapes in the world which can age really, really well. So the way people think about Riesling is very dominant on how they treat other grapes and wines in this country too. As everywhere, organic wine is becoming more and more popular. The two key labels for this we see is Ecovin, and then for biodynamic wine, Demeter, which I guess you have seen for many other products and other wines across the world too. And at the moment, it's about just under 10%, but this is steadily going up. And I think it's great to see that more and more producers are really not only trying to be organic and even biodynamic, but are also getting the certification. But at the moment, we still have many producers saying, I'm trying to work less conventional and more sustainable, but I'm still not willing to certify. You also often see other things on a label, like growers associations, and very often these are young wineries associating together to do marketing together. And the biggest of that would be the Generation Riesling, which is more than 500 members that are under 35. And these are like the young wild guys which have crazy labels like these and are trying to move the country along with a bit newer style and are often also pushing things in a different direction. Now, I don't know if you see much Sekt in Argentina, but I think it's very important to speak about it, especially because we Germans are very, very proud. We are the #1 consumer of sparkling wine. So we drink a lot of Sekt. So obviously we have to make some sparkling wine ourselves because we can't afford a champagne every day. However, very many sparkling wines from other countries or grapes from other countries are also produced in Germany and then sold on. So it's very important to look at your bottle very specifically. If it was just bottled in Germany or is actually a German sparkling wine. And basically, as you go down the page, the quality increases. So a Perl wine would be comparable to something like a Prosecco Frizzante, where you take a wine and then add carbon dioxide. Schaumwein is then a little bit better, but it's still a very generic term where you can hide many things. Sekt then is starting to become usually a bit better and usually the traditional method, but not necessarily. But the best things are the bottom 3. And again, we see the BA we saw from QBA, so from Qualitätswein, bestimmte Anbaugebiete. And then this would be a Sekt from a specific Anbaugebiet. And that would be what really gives you the insurance that what you're having is only from a certain wine growing region. Crémant, we tried to be international when we were introducing this label, but because it's very confusing with the French Crémants, not many producers are actually using this. And its regulations are very similar to Sekt BA. But the best ones are really usually the Winzer Sektor. And that's an entire process within one estate. This is something not all producers can do because if you just do a small amount of Sekt or sparkling wine, you might go to someone who's more specialized in Sekt to take care of your grapes. But usually between Sekt BA and Winzer Sekt, you really have outstanding German sparkling wines, which are not only made from Riesling, but also from classic Pinot grapes. And actually, I think for me, the most exciting grape for German sparkling wine is Weißburgunder or Pinot Blanc. So if you can taste that, it's a good alternative and cheaper than champagne. And this, I guess, you have seen from many other countries. It's very much like champagne or cava. These are the grams per liter of sugar. So the key category here would be Brut, like most others. So far, I think nobody has posted any questions. Everybody is being very shy. So please feel free to post questions. I'm sure you have some. And then we go to the German wine growing regions. I remember Valeria asked me at the beginning, where did I start with wine? And the place I come from is here, Köln. So in the yellow circle. I don't know if you see my mouse. And those, as you can see, is very far from any wine region. And the first place I did my wine harvest was in the Ahr. And the Ahr is also the region we're going to start with because I'll be doing the regions alphabetically, in case you wonder.
Mark, I have a few questions, but I prefer to ask them, when you finish the German presentation because they are, related to your restaurant, to natural wine trends, and why you don't use social media. But so you can ask them.
Okay. So as you can see, the majority of the German wine growing regions are in the southwestern part of Germany. So for a very long time, we had 11 wine growing regions. And then, as you probably know, Germany was split till 1990 between Western Germany and the Eastern Germany. And when they moved back together, we got 2 more wine regions, Saxony and Saale-Unstrut. But the majority of the German wine, and especially most of the producers you will see internationally, will be from somewhere in this area, which you can see is very close to France. And that's, you will see in many wine styles that they are similar to certain French wines. What's important to know, I think it's always good to know the largest regions, and this by far is Rheinhessen, making more than a quarter of the German wine, very quickly followed by Pfalz. So these 2 regions together make almost the half of German wine. And then you have other regions like Baden, Württemberg, and Mosel. And then on this side, you have the slightly smaller regions like Saxony or Sachsen, Mittelrhein, Hessische Bergstraße. And these are, you can see, really 400 hectares compared to 26,000. They're really tiny compared to Rheinhessen or Pfalz. So the R. The R to me is a beautiful region which often is overlooked, because when people think of German wine, people think of Riesling. And the R is one of just 2 regions, together with Württemberg, that make much more red wine than white wine. And it's located very high north. That's why it's also good for that very light style of red wine. And it's probably the one of the most northerly red wine regions in the world. And here it's very famous because it also has the oldest cooperative of the world, MasterclAAS, and it's very, very steep, as you saw in the first picture. We have about 68% of the R are steep slopes, so very difficult to harvest. And what do they grow there? You can see they mainly grow Spätburgunder for about 2/3. A little bit of Riesling. Everywhere in Germany we have a little bit of Riesling. We need something to drink when we finish our day at work. But we also, I think, something to look out for is Frühburgunder. And literally that means late Burgundy, early Burgundy. And that basically tells you Frühburgunder is similar to Spätburgunder, but it ripens a bit earlier and is a bit more lean, a bit more elegant. And to me, it's probably one of the best things R can do, and can be a real surprise. And I'm surprised to see it actually, even though it's a tiny production, I see more and more of this also on American wine lists. So it seems to be, the secret seems to travel. And this is where the R is located. Walporzheim is probably the most important village, you could say. It's not really a city. And here you can see we're close to Bonn, which some of the more senior members of the Zoom meeting might know as the former capital of Germany. So this is very close to Bonn, our former political capital. And that's the R. Because we have 13 regions, and I don't want to keep you from lunch too long, I'll be doing this quite fast, but please feel free to ask questions later. This is Baden, and Baden is the warmest wine region of Germany, located mainly close to Alsace. And as you can see, they really have a very specific landscape, because in the 70s mainly, they did something called Flurbereinigung, where they took away the natural hills and flattened it to make it more easy to produce wine here. And this is the whole region, so you can see it's quite a big region. Especially important for those of you learning exams, it actually has 9 different Bereiche, which is a German official term how to split a region into smaller regions, but doesn't really make sense in most regions except for Baden, because I think it's very obvious that a place like the Badische Bergstraße close to Mannheim will make very, very different wines to the Badisch Bodensee close to Lake Constance, because they are so far apart. It's about 400 kilometers. And I think in no other region you have such a variety of different styles. The majority of Baden is focusing on Pinot grapes. Riesling is just important in a small place called Ortenau, but the majority are really focusing on Spätburgunder with almost 1/3, and Grauburgunder, Weißburgunder. And this is also the first region in Germany to have Chardonnay as a Grand Cru since a couple of years. So it's really very popular, and usually because it's quite warm, they tend to be quite rich styles. And many of you might have heard about the Black Forest for the Kuckucksklocks or the Black Forest cake. This is the region where this is from. These are from Baden. And Baden is very interesting in terms of production structure, because about 70% of Baden is produced by cooperatives, and very much of that would be sold in local shops and in local gastronomy in Baden. And in terms of top producers, here you might know Fritz Keller, for example, is probably internationally one of the most important, or also Martin Basma, I assume, is internationally even more important than in Germany, which I always think is interesting.
Mark, can I ask you a question, maybe?
Yeah.
And I have a question that is, what is exactly a gold cup?
Sorry, what?
What is a gold cup? What is called gold cup?
Goldkapsel? Yeah, okay. I'll be answering that when we get to the Mosel, okay? Because it's more important for Mosel.
Perfect.
Yeah. If I forget, remind me, please. Good. So this again, you see Baden has the 9 Bereiche, which are very, very different. And probably the best Bereich is the Kaiserstuhl, where you have very many of the top Pinot producers being based. So Franconia, or Franken. This is one of my favorite pictures because this is located in Würzburg, and that's the main city of Franken. And many of you might know Germany for things like Oktoberfest or Bavaria, and Franken is the only region in Germany which is in that region. And they are focusing mainly on Silvaner as a grape, and that's made in a very special bottle, which you see here, called the Boxbeutel. And this place in Würzburg is really worth a visit when we can travel again, because it's called the Mainbrücke, and it's a bridge going across the river Main, which is the key river of Franken, which you can see here in Würzburg. But there people meet up and drink local wine on a bridge. And that's a really old tradition they do since centuries. And I think that's really nice when you go somewhere. In Germany, you don't usually see people drinking wine on the streets very often. But in Würzburg, that's something where they're very proud of their heritage. And here they focus locally on Müller-Thurgau, but for you guys who are working internationally, Silvaner is the key grape. And Silvaner is something I think is overlooked very often because it can ripen or mature very well. But it's also a great food wine, especially when you have vegetable dishes. Like here it's now asparagus season, and there Silvaner is the key grape, but also for many other plant-based dishes, Silvaner is a really, really good match. And I think it's very important when you speak about Franken to remember this bottle shape, Boxbeutel, because except for one small exception, if you see this bottle, it will be from Franken, except for Mateus Rosé from Portugal, which you might have seen in a very similar bottle too. But this is the German Boxbeutel. And in Franken, we have very different Bereiche. Again, we have the Main-Viereck, the Main-Dreieck, and Steigerwald, which all have very, very different soil structures. So within Franken, it's always important to look at where exactly is the producer based and where are the key villages. Like on many labels, you will see places like Volkach or Iphofen, and those would be probably the top communes you can find in Franken. And you can see it's bordering Baden. So again, we have this thing about Baden being very spaced out. So, Hessische Bergstraße. Literally, Hessen is like a community, or not a community, a region, political region of Germany, and Bergstraße is the road of the mountains. So that's what the Hessische Bergstraße is. As you remember from earlier, it's one of the smallest regions. It's located here, and it's more or less just focusing on Riesling and a little bit of other grapes. But you can see with 460 hectares, it's not very important internationally. And nowadays we see a lot of sparkling wine producers growing there because due to the high altitude, steep slopes, they can make very good sparkling wines, which they can pick early, which you need for that. And this would be the Hessische Bergstraße, and Darmstadt is the largest city there, but doesn't make any wine itself. Again, small region, but I think very, very important is the Mittelrhein, so the middle part of the Rhine. That's just when you follow the Rhine coming up from Switzerland, it goes through different parts of Germany. The most important one probably with it in the name would be Rheingau, but then when the Rheingau is finished, the Mittelrhein starts. So we are here in this region between the Rheingau and Bonn. And the Mittelrhein is a very small region, but it makes excellent Rieslings because it has very, very steep slopes. Actually, the steepest region we have in Germany, 80% of the Mittelrhein is steep slopes, so hand labor. And they really make excellent Riesling and have soil types very similar to the Moselle, so very similar to so schist, and yeah, that would be the main soil type. And Mittelrhein is very famous for something called the Lorelei, which is also UNESCO World Heritage. In the Mittelrhein, you have this very specific rock, which supposedly there was a beautiful woman sitting on it, the Lorelei, and all the people going on ships across the Rhine would crash their boats into the Lorelei. And that is how that became very famous. There are loads of songs and poems about this. But it's a really nice region to visit because of the steep vineyards, always interspaced with some old castles like the one shown here. So I really recommend visiting Mittelrhein and trying some of the Rieslings. It's often overlooked, but I think it's a hidden champion of Germany.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You grow Riesling, you know, all over Germany. How do you differentiate them, you know, between the regions? What's the profile from one Riesling from one region, from another region?
Yeah. Traditionally, the Mosel and the Rheingau were probably the most prestigious and most iconic Riesling regions of Germany, and have the longest track record. And both of these have also the longest track record of making the traditional styles, so the sweet styles, because Germany was very long drinking only sweet wine and only recently has really turned to very, very dry wines. And I think you can still go by that a little bit. The Mosel wines would be usually a little bit more delicate, a little bit more mineralic, and very often Mosel is still more known for its sweet wines than for its dry wines. Rheingau is somewhere in between, still trying to find its place a little bit. And then you have the more bolder styles like Pfalz, which is quite rich, quite powerful Rieslings, because it's also a little bit warmer. And then you have some other regions like Nahe, which are very producer specific, but generally Nahe is very much focused on also very mineralic dry wines. But those would be a very general differentiation. And then you get Riesling everywhere, like Württemberg, but there's no real typical Württemberg Riesling style, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Mosel is a river, as I hope many know, but in this region we actually have 3 rivers. And for a very long time, this region was known as Mosel, Saar, Ruwer until 2007. And Saar and Ruwer are 2 very, very important smaller rivers, which we'll see later. But Mosel has taken the region's name, which has been a big debate, but I think it's interesting. Obviously, Mosel is focusing on Riesling, but they also make a little bit of other grapes, which you probably won't see internationally, except for Spätburgunder, where I think Markus Molitor internationally has gotten high accolades for his style, more so than in Germany. But you can see it's really a white wine dominant region with 91%. What's important to know with the Mosel? Like we said, it's 3 different regions or rivers. It's the Mosel itself. Then we have the Saar, a tributary of the Mosel, and the Ruwer. And all of these are packed with very legendary producers. You might have probably heard of the village of Wiltingen on the Saar, where you have places like the Schatzhofberg, and there you have Egon Müller. Egon Müller is the most famous, makes some of the most expensive wines in the world. In the Ruwer, you have places like Kartäuserhof, which is the 7th oldest winery in the world. And then here you have very many iconic producers. And here you find a lot of Sonnenuhren, sundial, which give a lot of names to vineyards. And you also find schist. And I brought one Mosel wine today to show you, because I think it's a good example to see how the label is. And then we can also go back to the Goldkapsel. So you can see it a bit better. I show you it on the big label. And this is the producer I brought. I think he's quite well known internationally, J.J. Prüm or Johann Josef Prüm. And they're located in Behlen, which is a village in the Mosel. And this is from the vineyard Sonnenuhr. So Sonnenuhr is sundial, like we saw in the picture. And then what else do we have on this? We have 2002. A bit like in France, on some of these labels, you won't find the grape, because for a vineyard like the Behlener Sonnenuhr, to everybody, it's clear that it's Riesling. But on most German labels, you would find the grape. And then you have the Prädikat, the cabinet. And then if you go, there's no back label, it's an old bottling. But here you have things written like Riesling. It's still Mosel Saar Ruwer, not yet Mosel. And you can see the VDP and then the producer. What is very important, all these Prädikate have quite a big variance, because when you get the German wine menu, you will see that the way you pick it is different. And that is going back to the thing called Goldkapsel. The Mosel producers were all making Auslese, let's say, but the Auslese were tasting very, very different. And they were trying to come up with their own classification, which didn't really have any laws to them, like feine Auslese or hochfeine Auslese, and also for some of these, the Goldkapsel. And this would be this part of the bottle, which this is a regular capsule, like capsule, But then for a gold capsule, this would be completely golden. And then there would also be lange gold capsule, so the long gold capsule, and it would be something the producers did to indicate the style of how sweet the Auslese are and what to them is the best they made in certain vintages and certain vineyards. That is how they classified their wines. And to me, I think that you can't have a German wine presentation without Riesling, so I'll be sipping some Riesling, and I hope some of you do too. You can see it's becoming lovely, mature. 2002 has really developed very well now. It was quite a challenging vintage, but it's very important, I think, to have Riesling with age. And I think the beauty of a wine like this is also, it's a wine which has some sweetness, but is completely balanced by the acidity through the maturity. And I think that's one of the most amazing things. I tasted some Rieslings that are like 100, 110 years old, and they are so lively due to the acidity. I wrote down that acidity never dies, but the fruit and the sweetness are still there and give it a really nice balance. So, and this has on alcohol, I think it's 8%. So it's really something, some famous winemaker from the Mosel calls it the adult's lemonade. And I think that is probably the best description for this style of wine made in the Mosel and other places like Rheingau. So let's go back to them.
Sorry, regarding Pinot Noir, because you have said that Germany is a big producer of Pinot Noir around the world, along with New Zealand, France, and America. How can you tell us how to differentiate them? You know, if they're in a blind tasting, what's the descriptors for German Pinot Noir?
I think for me, Pinot Noir itself as a grape, it's more or less, sometimes it's more easy to identify than others because it's usually quite light in color, it's quite strong in acidity, and it goes in a very light red fruit character. But then I think it's very important to look at how is that red fruit character. For example, an Oregon Pinot Noir will be quite bold and will have almost a jammy red fruit to myself, whereas then the European Pinots will usually be a bit more delicate. I think this is becoming more and more difficult, but in general, you could differentiate Germany and Burgundian Pinot a little bit through soil types, because probably one of the most iconic vineyard sites for Pinot Noir in Germany is the Assmannshäuser Höllenberg, and that is in the Rheingau, and that is one of the few Pinot sites in the world which is based on schist, whereas in Burgundy, you probably know you have more clay and calcareous grounds. So there you have a very different kind of minerality, and I think it's a bit more like almost a graphite or pepper taste you have to many German wines. Obviously, us being usually a little cooler area, we tend to have a little less alcohol than many others, but due to global warming, that's sadly changing very quickly, so it's become more difficult. But in general, I think if you have a very delicate fruit, a strong, maybe schisty minerality, and a very strong acidity and less alcohol, then it's probably a German Pinot Noir. But it's becoming more and more difficult as producers are trying to change their style. But those would be the key tips. And actually that can happen. I think in 2016, they had a Assmannshäuser Höllenberg Spätburgunder in the World Cup. So it is an important wine in the world.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Now we have the Nahe. The Nahe is next to Rheinhessen. But it's a little bit cooler in general, and the Nahe is known for famous producers like Diehl, for example, Schlossgut Diehl, you would find here. And it's really focused in its distribution on Riesling, but they also make other grapes like some Weißburgunder or Grauburgunder you could see as well. But really what they're known for is Riesling, and it's something that was a little bit in between for a long time, but now in the last couple of BDP tastings, they were usually the ones that got the most homogeneous high scores, that most of the producers really did very, very well, because especially them being a bit cooler, they're really focusing now on a very mineralic, very age-worthy style of Riesling, and have really become very popular in all of Germany for their Rieslings. The Pfalz is probably one of the regions in Germany which is easiest to spot in a blind tasting, because for white wine and for red wines, it tends to be a little bit bolder, a little bit bigger and heavier than most others. Why? It's one of the slightly warmer regions, located right next to Alsace, and really making quite a powerful style, especially for Riesling. but also for other grapes like Spätburgunder. And then these are some of the Spätburgunder that are very easily confused with Burgundy because they have a bit more power to them than most German ones. So R would probably be easier to spot. But the Pfalz is really important to know because it's the second largest region, we remember, and it has a very confusing international name called the Palatinate. That would be the international name for this. And it was very famous because it was the first region that introduced wine tourism in Germany in the 1930s. They did the so-called Deutsche Weinstraße, so the German wine street. So when you go here, it's very developed and you can not only visit producers, but there are very many nice restaurants and museums about wine. And it's very historic, important for Bad Dürkheim, for example, where you get a lot of famous sausages, which is very typical German. But it's really worth visiting. And especially the Rieslings, it's important to remember these are much more powerful than the Rieslings you will find in most other regions in Germany. Almost done, the Rheingau, where I did my first sommelier job. It's very interesting in terms of structure because the Rhine, when it comes from Switzerland, it nearly always flows north. However, when it hits here, it hits a mountain range. And it's the Hunsrück leading into the Taunus, and there the river had to make a bend. So nearly the entire Rheingau is south-facing. So it's very sunny. All the vineyards are in the sun. And on the other side of the river, you then have Rheinhessen. And because of the sun, the Rheingau wines, when they were still more or less the only ones except Mosel, were usually a bit more powerful than Mosel. Mosel was always a bit more delicate, a bit more elegant. And Rheingau was slightly bolder, also made very classic Riesling styles. As you can see, it's very clear in terms of grapes. They make Riesling, Spätburgunder also quite good, and then Weißburgunder and other grapes. But basically all of this is famous for Riesling. I guess many have heard of Rüdesheim before, but then the last part is probably the part most known for Pinot Noir, where you have the famous Assmannshäuser Hellenberg. And there is also a little bit of the Main still in Hochheim, where you might know people like Künstler, but then this is really the key part of the Rheingau. The Rheingau has been very important historically to Germany, partially because of this estate, Schloss Johannisberg, because Schloss Johannisberg was the estate which invented the late harvest. The Spätlese was invented in there because of an old funny anecdote where somebody came late with the letter that they allowed to pick their grapes, and that's how by accident they developed the late harvest in 1775. But also because this place, Kloster Eberbach, which you might know from the film The Name of the Rose, and they are one of the oldest estates. If you want to try some old wine, they still have wine from the 19th century in high amounts. And also here in Rheingau, we have Geisenheim, which is the famous university for German winemakers.
So Marc, I have a question. How can you describe, the Dornfelder wine?
The Dornfelder, okay.
Yes. Sorry, the pronunciation. So what's the difference?
I'm just smiling because Dornfelder is something we usually don't want to talk about. Dornfelder has been very popular in the domestic market, but even there, except from the wine grain regions, you don't find it. It's quite a dark grape. It's very colorful, and that's what it was used for originally, to give more color to the Pinot Noir. And it's a bit like an overripe Merlot, you could say. It's very much on the plum side. It has a little bit of green notes, and it's really quite powerful. But it's going back in production, and not many high-quality producers will make a Dornfelder.
Thank you.
So Rheinhessen is the biggest region on the other side of the river compared to Rheingau. Rheinhessen is one of the regions which has really grown a lot in terms of prestige also. There are famous producers like Keller here, making wines like G-Max, which have horrendous prices now, like 400 euros a bottle. And they make very many different grapes. They make Riesling, but they also make very good Spätburgunder, but you would also find some Savannah or other grapes too. And again here, it's very important to look where is the producer based, because they have very different areas here. And the most famous area would probably be Wonnegau, where you have Westhofen, where you have very famous producers like Lippmann or Keller. And now Rheinhessen is finally famous for its good wines, but sadly, Rheinhessen was very famous very long time for Liebfrauenmilch, which were made in this church, which is located in Worms. And the style they made there was then adopted by very many other regions, and it was slightly off-dry, style made by historic white grapes. And the most famous international wine brand of Germany is still Blue Nun, which is the Liebfrauenmilch you would find in a British supermarket. But that's something really has no large quality, but it was the most famous German wine for a very long time. But here I think it's more important to focus on the good producers doing GG wines now that are quite powerful, not as powerful as Pfalz or Baden, but are quite powerful, and especially Rieslings have become very age-worthy, but more for the dry style than sweet style. Very quickly, just the two regions in the east. The Saale-Unstrut is made from two small rivers. Very small region, just over 700 hectares, makes mainly white wine and mainly grapes like Müller-Thurgau or Weißburgunder. Riesling is not so important here. And it's really based on these two small rivers, but there are very few producers you will probably ever see. Even in Germany, you won't see wines from Saale-Unstrut outside the region very much. And similar it is for Sachsen, or Saxony in English, where you have very many famous castles. We are here, so the most eastern wine region. But what you would know from Sachsen would be the city of Dresden. And Dresden is very famous, especially for its historic center, which is probably one of the most beautiful old towns of Germany and has a lot of old art. But Sachsen itself, again, makes a mix of Traminer, Weißburgunder, Müller-Thurgau, many grapes you don't find that much. However, because there are so many historic Schlösser or castles there are many producers that have a long tradition of making sparkling wine. So it's one of the hidden champions for sparkling wine, you could say, because it's quite cool. They make very elegant sparkling wines. And if you work in a restaurant, you might have heard of this place, Meissen, because this is one of the most famous places in the world for porcelain, also not only for wine. Last but not least, then we're finished. Number 13 is Württemberg. And Württemberg is very important because Württemberg, like the Ahr, is one of the only two regions which are red wine focused. And that's very unusual for Germany. And Württemberg is located across the cities of Stuttgart and Heilbronn. Stuttgart might be famous for Porsche, for example, for people liking cars. But Württemberg does interesting red grapes. They get their prestige now from grapes like Lemberger, which is our German name for Blaufränkisch, and Spätburgunder. But they make very many other grapes like Trollinger or Schwarzriesling, Pinot Meunier, which you would only find there. For example, Trollinger is a very peculiar grape they only drink in that region. It's very, very light, and it's almost like drinking a rosé, but it is classified as red wine. But even Jancis Robinson writes in her book, I don't understand why people drink Trollinger. It's not worth taking out of Stuttgart. And you can see here, Württemberg is also very, very steep, and that's very often overlooked. It's actually one of the interesting sites if you want to look at steep vineyards in Germany. People always think of Mosel and Mittelrhein, but Württemberg is very, very steep, with almost 2/3 of the vineyards being steep. And especially if you want to have a good Lemberger, so an alternative to an Austrian Blaufränkisch, I think it's really important looking at the producers of Württemberg, like, for example, Schneidmann makes really interesting Lembergers that can age. And the Rieslings are good to have too, but I would focus on the red wines of this region. So that was all of Germany in 40 minutes. So a speed train. If any of you want to look more into German wines, we will be sending the documents through, but this is the good website to go to. It also has an English page. I'm not sure about Spanish, where you can look at all the regions more in depth. And otherwise, it's always good to look at the VDP, because the VDP has really good information too. So cheers, Riesling.
Marc, I have one question. What do you think are, the sommelier trends in Germany? I mean, what do you think about small producers, old wines, natural wines, and everything in Germany and in the world?
Yes. In Germany, I think it's very important to understand Germany is quite a big country. So we have very different wine cultures. In the wine growing regions, obviously they focus on the local producers and try to showcase that. Then in Berlin is a very artistic city. You have a lot of people working in music, in fashion, etc. So also the sommeliers have very other customers than usual. So they are very much focusing on organic and natural wines. And if you have an orange wine in Germany, it's probably somebody in Berlin that first bought it. So those would be very much what they focus on. In the rest of Germany, the dry Rieslings, the Riesling große Gewächse, are really what have driven the development in the last couple of years. And now people are slowly looking again for other grapes like Spätburgunder, Weißburgunder, Grauburgunder, and Silvaner. Really, people are looking more for dry wines, and the sweet wines are sadly being overlooked a little bit, although those are actually what Germany has been famous for most of its wine growing history. And that would be the local trends. I think here it's also important to see that wine is not only being drunk in restaurants anymore, but we see more and more people drinking wine at home, also before Corona, but also we see more and more wine bars popping up. And that's very much, I think, a good development. Internationally, I think it's very similar. I see more and more colleagues focusing on organic wines and especially natural and orange, although I'm always a bit cautious with that because I think it's something we in the wine world discuss a lot, but not many of our customers have encountered yet. So I think you need to be very specific to your restaurant or your shop, if that's something you want to invest in or not. I see what I really love, more and more people moving away from the classics, not forgetting the classics, but being open to interesting wines from all over the world. For example, from Argentina, for a long time, people only knew Malbec. And now we're learning that you have other grapes too. And I see even in a Swiss supermarket, a Torrontés, for example, which is something I would not have seen 10 years ago. And I think that's great to see that because we are growing together internationally through social media and through the internet and traveling usually more, people are starting to realize that there are very many interesting grapes in many countries, and it's important to look beyond the big established regions. And I see this also happening a lot in wine bars, where the wine service to me is becoming much more casual, which I think is good, that there are restaurants where you need to have a formal service, but I think it's great to introduce wine in a casual environment, so we also make sure the young people keep drinking wine and don't turn to other drinks.
Good. And about social media, why are you not in social media?
I am on social media, the hashtag Marc Almert on Instagram, but I don't have an account, that's correct. Because it sounds a bit weird, but I am a lazy guy. And I think if you do Instagram or Facebook properly, you should spend some time on it. You should make nice pictures. You should, if somebody posts a comment, you should be able to answer. And I always thought it's more important for myself to focus on learning and doing my job at the restaurant than being on social media. I do watch what people do on social media. I think it's very important to get some inspiration and to see what's going on in the world, especially in a situation like this. And I think now I'm really learning that social media is a great way to stay in touch. Like we're doing some Instagram live sessions and Zoom and Facebook live tastings. And I think that's great that we can stay connected. But to me personally, if I do something, I want to do it 100%, and I don't have the amount of time I would like for social media. So I'm happy to always jump in and out, but I don't have my own accounts.
Okay, fair enough. And what to expect from now on, after this hard time we are experiencing all around the world?
I think it's very different on which country you work. I think one thing we are all united in, all of us sommeliers can't be with our guests at the moment. So we have to see what we can do. In some countries, I don't know how it is in Argentina, but in some countries, I think it's really a big threat for the industry because many restaurants will probably have financial difficulties, and that might mean that some sommeliers will have to change their job, which I think is something we need to make sure we have a loud voice in social media, but also in classic media, to make sure that people don't forget us and to make sure that the politicians are thinking of us when they're making their decisions. That's something I think is crucial. And I think it's important that we think about how we can adapt. And that can mean many things. Obviously, the way we will do service will be very different in the next month until there is a vaccine. Like in our hotel, we are currently working on page-long documents on how we can make a hygienic service. And I think that's something also from the sommelier side, being a senior waiter in restaurants you work in, you need to consider, how can I teach my teams and how can I give my guests a good feeling of security by working in a very hygienic manner and thinking about what I need to change with my wine service. And I think that's something we can do. What all of you are doing today is a great example of what we can do. We can stay connected, even though we can't see each other. I think it's great that we can stay connected with the sommelier world, with learning about wine. It's great that we spend time doing this rather than watching Netflix. But I think it's also a way to stay connected to our guests. If you're on a restaurant that has a social media account, you can do a tasting with your guests. You can sell wine to them via mail and do that. And I think that is something that will stay, that many of our restaurants will start looking into options of delivery, both of wine, but also food. And we as a sommelier need to find our role in that. And I think it's something we can shape ourselves. If we make sure we are heard in the world, I think it's something we can use this to learn, because it's probably going to be a long time before I drink another sake with Matthias in Kyoto, like we first met. So we need to make sure how we can do that in a different manner, still stay connected, still make revenue, but in a different fashion. And I think that's important, that we remain flexible and remain innovative to think of some things ourselves on what we can do and propose it to our managers.
Okay. Well, I have the last question, and besides that, we are running out of time. And you said Germans drink a lot of sparkling wine. What are the most famous and best labels in Germany, and what are the prices?
German sparkling wine always comes with a tax, and this tax is just under €1 per bottle. So that's important to consider for sparkling wine tax. But apart from that, sparkling wines will start at about €6, €7, €8 for the really entry qualities, but then will go up to about €40 or €50, usually not much higher. And that's really a very rare pocket. You will find very many good sparkling wines between 15 and 25 euros. The key producer who has really shaped the industry is Raumland, it's called, and he is located in Flörsheim-Dalsheim within Rheinhessen, and he started making a lot of good sparkling wine himself, but also very many other producers that just wanted to make a small production asked him to take care of their production. So he really has been like a driving horse for the whole industry. Apart from that, many famous producers you might know from their still wines also make very good sparkling wine, like Schloss Gudil makes something called Cuvée Mo, which is very close to the style of Bollinger, for example. But there are many new producers just entering the market. For example, the old chef de cave of Bollinger used to work at Von Buhl for a long time. So if you get recent bottlings from Von Buhl, they really are almost like a very good champagne. But now he's just about to set up his own production.
I have one more before I pass the word to Matthias. What do you think is the approach of the winemakers in Germany about blends? Or they prefer to stick to varietal labeling?
There's both. I mean, Germany is originally known for its varietal labels, and especially for the Grand Crus, you have to make a varietal label. However, we do see some blends. However, these are more for the domestic market. In terms of white, we very often see a blend Weißburgunder and Chardonnay that used to be done partially because the Chardonnay vines were quite young and were difficult to bottle on their own. Now the Chardonnay is becoming more mature, so it's different. But you see that blend quite a lot for whites. And apart from that, you see quite a lot of red blends, because Germany is in the process of introducing many grapes to prepare for global warming. So more and more producers are planting Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, etc. But they are not as good sometimes that they want to market them as monovarietal, so they blend them with other grapes. And one of the most famous producers, not necessarily the most prestigious, would be Marco Schneider from the Pfalz, who makes a wine called Black Print, which is quite iconic and like a red wine blend made from modern varietals. But most of the traditional VDP producers will focus the majority of the production on single varietal wines.
And where are these varietal planted? Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah, where are they planted?
Especially many of those red wine varietals are planted in the Pfalz. And there you will see many, like Knipser makes an outstanding Cuvée X, which is a Cabernet blend. So they are focusing on that. Apart from that, everybody's dabbling a little bit. Like there's even a producer who makes Nebulor in Saxony, although it's very high in the northeast, and we would not think they could do it. So you do find them a little bit everywhere, but the Pfalz is the majority of that, and a little bit in Rheinhessen.
Thank you so much, Marc. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to me. I leave you with Matthias.
Well, thank you very much, Valeria, and also Mark, for this top masterclass. The first thing to say is that Mark prepared some specific documents, not only a presentation, but some documents specifically, exclusively for this class. So we will share some documents. We will be very interesting for all of us to know more about the German wines, and also to say hello to Per and all the German colleagues in this talk. As we say at the beginning, is the way. I mean, it's the best way, or some way to keep us all connected with Mark, with all the German colleagues. So again, thank you, Mark, for sharing this time with us, and also to share all your knowledge. Thank you all. Thank you all our sommeliers, and we will see each other next week with another masterclass of our association. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for putting this together to the Argentinian Sommelier Association. And I hope you...
We wait for you sometime when this coronavirus will end, but we will be waiting for you to share some glasses, not only about German wine, but also for Argentinian wine with all our sommeliers. Thank you, Mark.
It would be great. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a todos. Nos vemos la próxima semana.